Hi, and welcome to the Castle Rock Museum. We're so excited to have you visit us today. I'm Angie DeLeo, the director of the museum, and some of our staff are going to take you on a little tour. The Castle Rock Museum was once a railroad depot made out of rhyolite. That's our topic for today, and that's why you're here to visit us. We're going to take you on a little bit of a tour around the museum and show you a few interesting things, and then we'll have the staff talk to you about rhyolite. We're here in the Castle Rock Museum, which was once the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Depot for Castle Rock. As I said before, it's made out of rhyolite, and we have something interesting here in the baggage area of the old depot. All these wonderful names on the wall. The oldest one is the one at the top there, from 1875, when this building was built. And the GAT there stands for George Alvin Triplett, who was the telegraph operator in the depot at that time. This is the original ticket window from the depot. You would come in the passenger door over here, come up to the window. The station agent would ask you where you would like to go, and then you purchase your ticket, especially from Castle Rock to Denver. And here we have pictures of some of our old buildings in town, many of which are school buildings, all made out of rhyolite. We used to have a lovely courthouse here, also made out of rhyolite, but unfortunately it burned down. Even though the courthouse burned down, we're fortunate to have an artifact from the old courthouse. This is a jury chair, drawer number 2. But it has a special secret on the bottom here, a little rack for the cowboys to hide their hat. One more artifact we'd like to show you is this bell. It used to be a fire bell, but now it was turned into a curfew bell. That meant at 9 o'clock when they rang it, all children under 16 had to be home. Some parents tell me that they still like that idea today, and we're going to ring it for you. Well, we're going to end our little tour around the museum at the general store that we created here. We have a couple of fun things to do, to look at. One is a scale where you can weigh your eggs. We have a cheese cutter, because cheese came in a big wheel, and our vintage cash register. Well, thank you again for joining us. Now we're going to have a little demonstration by Miss Claudine about a volcano.
Hi, I'm Claudine. We're going to talk to you today about rhyolite. That's the special stone that was quarried here around Castle Rock, and it's used in buildings all over the place, including the one I'm in right now, which is the Castle Rock Museum. And it's used in the Molly Brown House. Mr. Tom is going to talk to you in a little while about how rhyolite comes from volcanoes. In the meantime, I thought it would be fun to do a little demonstration about an erupting volcano. So, to do an erupting volcano, you start off with a volcano. I happen to have a plastic one. You can make one out of paper mache, or you can just use a glass. Just anything cylinder-like will do really good for this. So, then you take some baking soda and you pour it in the cylinder. And then you have white vinegar. However, mine has red food coloring in it so that it can make it look like lava. And then you sit back and you make it erupt. Pretty cool, huh? So now we're going to move on to Mr. Tom. He's going to talk to you about different types of rhyolite, including the type that's used in the buildings. Thanks.
I'm Tom Mokelstead, prehistory specialist here at the museum. I'm a retired geologist, and prior to coming here I was education director at an outdoor museum up in Jefferson County at open space, Jefferson County Open Space Park, called Dinosaur Ridge. Today we're talking about the Castle Rock Rhyolite, which is a volcanic rock Volcanic rock meaning that it originated as a magma in a magma chamber inside of a volcano and was eventually expelled as lava and flowed off somewhere, cooled down to become rock. There are three main kinds of volcanic rock: basalt, andesite, and then our rhyolite. And the most common is basalt. Basalt makes up the ocean floor, so that's already over half the surface of the earth. And it on the floors is a few kilometers thick. And then there are other places on land where in the past huge quantities of basalt were erupted. Those include Siberia, India, and our own eastern Washington state, eastern Oregon. Those are called flood basalts, meaning that they came out in huge quantities over long periods of time, and it's now thought that some of these may have been responsible for mass extinctions of plants and animals. How is it produced? Here in the North Atlantic, we see this ridge going down the center of the ocean called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. That ridge actually winds around the Earth and is about 40,000 miles long. Long enough to go around the Earth at the equator more than 1.5 times. And all along there, basalt sort of oozes out. In other words, it doesn't erupt violently like some of the other kinds of volcanoes that we have. If you're interested in seeing an example in Iceland, where this ridge actually comes up above the surface of the ocean, there's an eruption going on right now, and you can even watch a webcam of it. I've been watching it. It's described as a fissure eruption, meaning coming out of a crack. I don't really see that, but it might be on the back side of a ridge out of view. But you see basalt oozing out of this circular crater, going down a slight incline and then spreading out. And that's what basalt tends to do. It spreads out. It's a very fluid lava. It's got a lot of gas in it, but the gas can move freely through the lava, kind of lubricating it, and then it's allowed to escape. And you watch these eruptions, whether it's the Icelandic volcano or Kilauea, you'll see a lot of gases, water vapor, etc. Escaping. And our other good example of a basalt volcano are the Hawaiian Islands. And these are huge volcanoes with only their tips above the water, where our 50th state is. And the large island is the largest volcano on Earth. When you consider it as originating from the ocean floor and then build up over time, actually layer by layer, like pancakes, horizontal layers, up to its present height, called Mauna Loa. Then Kilauea is just kind of a flank eruption on the side. And how can they build such large structures over time? Well, it's because in Hawaii anyway, the eruptions are almost continuous. Kilauea has erupted since 1982. A year or two ago it ceased, but it started back up again and is in the news. So a little bit of time, almost continuously, is how these basalts can become so voluminous. Andesite volcanoes are the cones. These are the volcanoes I think most of us think of when we think of a volcano. It's the shape of the model that Claudine showed us. And instead of building up horizontal layers, these build up more like, layering builds up more like shingles. So you get this cone shape. And from time to time, and this is much more sporadic than the basaltic type volcanoes, they erupt violently. They often blow the top off of the mountain. And when the eruption is over with, over time, smaller eruptions, they will build themselves back up, restoring the shape of the cone. That's what appears to be happening at Mount St. Helens, which was a very well studied eruption back in 1980. The top of that mountain was blown off. It lost about 1,700 feet. But since then, there have been a number of very minor eruptions in the crater, and lava the consistency of something like toothpaste squeezes up and out and is building a couple of large lava domes in the crater. It may be that in 50 or 100 years ago it will have restored itself to its former elevation and shape. But because the lava is less fluid, pastier, it doesn't allow the escape of gas like the basaltic lavas do. And so they can be very explosive. How often do they erupt? Well, not continuously, but it may be something on the order of every 1,000 years, with the most active, like Mount St. Helens, erupting every 100 years. And the least active, if it's even still active, something like Mount Mazama, the name of the volcano before it was blown apart in a violent eruption, becoming Crater Lake, something like every 10 or 20,000 years. So maybe an average is 100,000 years. And these volcanoes ring the Pacific Ocean, the Circum-Pacific, or the so-called Ring of Fire. Then we have rhyolite volcanoes. And these are so rare that I think there have only been 3 since 1900, and I don't think any are as well studied and documented as, say, Mount St. Helens and some of the others, like Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. Erupts very violently. The lava is even pastier than andesitic lava. It traps, tends to hold in the gases, and so then when the gases finally build up enough pressure to cause an eruption, they tend to be very violent. And some of the biggest volcanic eruptions known have been from some so-called super volcanoes, of which Yellowstone Park is one. Here's a painting of the eruption of the Castle Rock Rhyolite. This is from a book called Ancient Denvers by Johnson and Reynolds, and is shown here with permission from the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. It's of course their best guess as to what this might have looked like. This is the view from the Castle Rock area looking southwest towards Buena Vista, Mount Princeton area. And what you can see, you can't see the volcano, but you can see the ash plume rising into the air, probably as high as 20 miles, and eventually over time was dispersed around the globe. Ash and droplets of sulfuric acid may have cooled Earth's climate for years, but apparently not enough to trigger an ice age. This cloud of gas and droplets and ash is very tall. You can see that compared to the size of the trees right here. And so this is several hundred feet high, and it's moving at us as much as 100 miles an hour, probably on a bed of super hot gas acting as a lubricant, sort of like a puck moving on a column of air if you've played air hockey. Our knowledge of the forests that were here comes from petrified wood that is found throughout Douglas County, but then also to the southeast and north in other counties. People who come into the museum see our petrified wood display, and many have said that they've found their own petrified wood either on their land, somebody else's land, or the log that we have, which is over a foot long, was donated from the was found in East Plum Creek. Forests that were here then 36.7 million years ago were about 30 million years younger than the Castle Rock rainforest, which would have been a lot warmer and wetter situation with hundreds of kinds of trees. Whereas here only about 20 species have been identified, and some of that work has been done up at Cherokee Ranch near Sedalia. So when this cloud came into this area, slowed down, it started to collapse. And it fell in on itself to the point where the cloud went from a few hundred feet tall, wound up as a layer about 20 feet thick. And these droplets of lava falling on each other, sort of like snow, would have trapped some air, would have compressed the air as it was doing that. So it was sort of like snow, but this accumulation then had trapped air in it, and that is why the rhyolite is a light rock, light in weight, and somewhat easy to manage for building purposes. That's why it has made a good building stone. All of the plant and animal life, including the forests in the painting, would have been killed instantly. Actually, the kill zone probably extended out several more miles from Castle Rock. This is the largest animal that would have been in this area at that time, called Megacerops. This particular genus lived here from before the rhyolite, 38 million years ago, and after the rhyolite, 34 million years ago. The family of Brontotheres were here much longer than that, from 52 million years ago till 27 million years ago, when they finally went extinct because of climate change. Climate got colder and drier. So as the cloud collapsed, depositing the rhyolite on the ground in this area, and trapping air and compressing that air, and we all know what happens when you compress air, think bicycle pump, it heats up. So this 20-foot layer of rhyolite sat there and cooled off rather slowly enough that it developed some crystals that we can see if you hold the pieces just right in light. We have three main colors of Castle Rock rhyolite. This is a light brown, or some people call it a light yellow. There's a light gray, and a light pink. And then this large piece here is a chunk of the brown variety of Castle Rock Rhyolite. If you hold it just right in the light, it's sparkly. That's because there are tiny crystals that you can see with an eyepiece. Geologists call a hand lens, jewelers call a loupe. There are at least three kinds that you can see: a clear mineral, an opaque light colored mineral, and then this has tiny flecks of a flat black mineral called biotite. In addition, you see little holes. One of them goes all the way through this rock, and these are a few trapped gas bubbles. Some of them may actually represent twigs and branches and so on that got caught up in the lava flow, got completely burned up, and left behind their shape. These little black, sort of leafy appearing patterns are not fossil plants, but rather a mineral growth. And we see these a lot of times growing in cracks in rocks. It's manganese dioxide, a mineral called pyrolusite. And this is just the way it grows, in little leaf-like patterns. This is also rhyolite. The variety is called obsidian. This is what rhyolite looks like when it cools really fast. It chills into a glass that is very sharp when it breaks. The Native Americans used it for arrowheads and scrapers and knives. And it's still used for surgery scalpels because it can be honed to such a sharp edge. Also cooling fast is this piece, and if you can see, it's just full of tiny holes, which were gas bubbles. So this cooled off before the gas could work its way out and escape. And it's super light. If we had water here, we can show you that it floats. Okay, this painting is also from ancient Denver's, and it shows us what the landscape is thought to have looked like after the Castle Rock Rhyolite. It shows that the Castle Rock area was a lava plain, but then it was dissected by a fairly substantial stream. You can see a canyon cut into it. And deposited in that canyon was sand and gravel, which became the Castle Rock conglomerate, which is the rock that caps the small butte called Rock Park. The Castle Rock conglomerate was deposited by a huge stream flowing from north to south. And they know that because there are some huge boulders in there, desk-sized boulders that came down from Coal Creek Canyon up near north of Golden, up near Boulder. And for them to be that large and transported that far along the Front Range indicates huge stream, and the idea behind that is torrential rains. So there was something going on with the climate at that time. I thought about what sort of event might have caused a lot of rainfall at that time, and one global event that happened at that time was an impact in the Chesapeake Bay area. It happened about 36 million years ago. So maybe the Castle Rock conglomerate and the rainfall in that event are related. Certainly more work would have to be done to establish a relationship. That's it for the Castle Rock Rhyolite and the petrified wood and Castle Rock conglomerate. And now Jim will talk to you about quarrying of the rhyolite and its use as a building stone.
Hi, I'm Jim Hansman. I'm the curator here at the Castle Rock History Museum, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the discovery of rhyolite in this area and how it became a wonderful building stone. A fellow by the name of Silas Madge found a lot of this stone on one of the mountainsides here in Castle Rock, and he thought, well, maybe there's going to be gold or silver in this amongst the stone. And he took it to Denver to have some experts look at it, and they decided, no, it's not going to have any silver or gold in it, but if you have a lot of this stone, it's going to make a really good building stone because it's lightweight and it's easy to work with. Well, he soon discovered that he had a whole mountainside of rhyolite, as it's called, and he started quarrying the stone. And this would have been in 1872. And quarrying is similar to mining, except it's above ground. You don't have to go into caves to get it. So anyway, he opened the quarry, the Madge Quarry. It soon became known as the Douglas Quarry because this was Douglas County. The stone proved really popular as a building stone. Now, if you're here at the Molly Brown House today, you can see some of that stone, the gray stone, and it actually comes in a couple of different shades. It comes in gray and pink and kind of a rose color. Anyway, the first year he shipped about 1 million pounds of this stone to various places. And as I said, it became a very popular building stone. And there are about 3 dozen buildings here in Denver made of rhyolite. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. But the Madge Quarry, his quarry, was the biggest one. And then soon after, actually about 10 years later, 1881, a second quarry opened called the O'Brien Quarry. And then it was another 8 or 9 years in 1889 that a third major quarry opened, and that one was called the Santa Fe Quarry. I just want to show you over my shoulder here, there's a picture of the workmen in the Santa Fe Quarry, and that's what it looked like. They started out with horse-drawn wagons to haul the stone out. And this picture here shows the same quarry, the Santa Fe Quarry, and the railroad tracks that they built into the quarry so they could haul out more stone, much more than they could with the horses and carts. Now they took these down to the main railway so they could load them onto boxcars, and they shipped them all along, as far north as Cheyenne, Wyoming, and all the way down to New Mexico. And it was a very profitable business because there were so many builders that wanted to use this beautiful stone that was easy to work with. Now, the quarry workers were very strong and hardy individuals, and they worked long days. They worked about 10 or 11 hours a day, and they worked 6 days a week, and all they made was about $2 a day. Can you imagine that, working that long for 2 hours a day? And the work was dangerous besides. Now, one of the things they had to do, they would have to drill into the stone so that they could pry it loose and cut it out. Now, here's this is the type of drill bit that they would have used. You can see how long this is, that they would drill into the stone and then place dynamite in it to blast some of the stone loose so that they could use it. Here's an example of some of the type of explosives that they would have used to blow up the stone so that they could get at it better and could dig it out better. So as I mentioned, it was very dangerous work, and over the years, it was about 35 years that they actually quarried the stone. A few people were killed because of the dangerous nature of the work, There were landslides and people would get crushed underneath rock. One person had one of his toes cut off by a falling rock. Another, he was bitten in the finger by a rattlesnake. So you had to look out for those types of things as well. Very dangerous work, very hard work. Okay, I mentioned earlier that Silas Madge began quarrying rhyolite from his quarry in 1872. The first building here in Castle Rock made of rhyolite was built in 1875, and we'll get to that building a little bit later. First I want to talk about the first residential neighborhood in Castle Rock, and that would be the Craig and Gould neighborhood, named for Jeremiah Gould and John Craig, two of the founding fathers of Castle Rock, donated some land so that the town could sell lots. The first building I want to mention in that neighborhood is the Cantrell School, and that is built on Schoolhouse Hill, and it's between 3rd and 4th Streets on Cantrell Street. It was built because the previous high school had burned down in November of 1896, and the Cantrell School was ready for the opening of school in August of 1897. Now the school itself is like two intersecting buildings with separate hip roofs on it, and it's a 2-story building, but in between them and towards the front is a 3-story bell tower. And the bell tower holds the entrance to the school, as well as on the 3rd floor itself is the school bell, which by the way still rings today. Now across the street, across 4th Street from the school, is the Christ Episcopal Church. It was built in 1906, and actually that's one of the last rhyolite buildings built here in Castle Rock. The Episcopalians had been traveling to Sedalia every Sunday for services and for whatever else they needed from their church. And in 1906 they decided it was time to build their own. And today, of course, it's been added to many times over the years, but the original church made of rhyolite is still there. And it's still used for special events and for weddings. It seats about 90 people. And now let's talk about the Ball House. The Ball House was built in the 1880s, and it was purchased by Frank and Caroline Ball about 1895. They wanted to move closer to the Cantrell School so their kids would have easy access to education. Frank was, in fact, very active in education, and he served as the county superintendent of schools for probably over 20 years. His daughter, Cornelia, was among the first graduating class at Cantrell School, and 3 of his 5 children went into education. Now if we turn back west from the Ball House and walk down the street a block, we come to the Smith House, named for Upton Treat Smith. His friends, of course, called him Treat. This is a very ornate rhyolite home, very small, probably the smallest in town. He was a rancher or farmer, actually a dairy farmer, and he was one of those that would take his wares, take his wagon load of butter into Denver to sell. He claims to have sold butter to every single store in Denver. In 1902 he built a house like the Ball family. He built it so that his kids could be closer to the school. Okay, let's continue down 4th Street, heading west for a block. We come to Front Street, and if we turn right there, we'll see at the end of the block, a very short block, another rhyolite house, and this is known as the Maples. Now this house was built by George Patrick Stewart. He had a really busy year in 1901. First he purchased the Santa Fe Quarry, and then using stone from that quarry built himself a home here. An interesting fact about Stewart is that he actually owned Castle Rock. Now I'm talking about the rock itself, not the town. So he had a picture window, at least it was a picture window for that day and age, in his dining room, so that he could sit at his dining room table and gaze out on this beautiful rock that he owned. Now upon his death, per his request, his children donated the rock to the town of Castle Rock. So from the Maples, let's retrace our steps heading east on 4th Street and then turning south on Cantrell. There's two little houses there I want to mention because they're not made of rhyolite, but one is the Cantrell house. It was the first brick house built in the Craig and Gould neighborhood. Next to it on the south side is what is often referred to as the Sears house. Now this was a catalog house. You purchased the house from the Sears catalog or some other manufacturer, and they ship the parts for the house to your location and you assemble it. Now just on the south side of the Sears house, it will be on the corner of 2nd and Cantrell, is the Hammer house. The Hammer house has quite a history in this town. It was built by Benjamin Hammer in 1881. Benjamin was he owned or was part owner of one of the quarries here in town. I believe it was the O'Brien quarry. He was also a stonemason. He put together this gorgeous house, and he had a way of just putting in a lot of these colored rhyolite stones, the red or the pinks, whichever color it may have been, so that it just kind of made a really interesting looking house. One of the longest residents in the Hammer house was Dr. George Alexander. He practiced medicine here in Colorado from 1893 until 1947. All but one of those years right here in Castle Rock. So the house was actually in his family for about 80 years. He used it as both a residence and as his medical clinic. It was later purchased by Starr and Lionel Oberlin. They're important in this town because they were among the founders of the Castle Rock Historical Society. Lionel was also the first director here at the museum, a position he served in for well over 10 years. They were also instrumental in getting the house listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Now, there are 5 buildings in town on the National Register, and the Hammer House is the only residence among those buildings. Now, if we continue down Cantrell Street for a couple of blocks, we're going to come to the Depke House. The Depke House is interesting in the fact that it was right along the side track that went up to one of the quarries. So they delivered the stone right to the property on the box cars and were able to dump it off there, and it was cut to match and to build the house. Also, there was a garage built right behind the house, also made of rhyolite. Okay, if we come back to 3rd Street and turn west and head across Wilcox Street, and we'll look off to the south, we will see the St. Francis of Assisi Church. Now, this was the first Catholic church built here in Castle Rock, and it served the congregation until 1966, when they decided they needed a bigger church and they built one on the east side of town. So the church then sat empty for about 10 years until it was reopened in 1975 as the Old Stone Church Restaurant. Now, right across the street from the church is the Courthouse Square. It was here in 1889 that began construction on our beautiful Rhyolite Courthouse. Beautiful building. Unfortunately, it was destroyed in a fire in 1978. Now, if we look east from Courthouse Square, on the corner of 3rd and Wilcox is the Masonic Lodge. This building was originally the First National Bank of Douglas County. It was built in 1904. And it was closed down in 1933 because of the worldwide depression. And it was one of many banks in the nation that never reopened. Shortly after its closure, it was purchased by the Masonic Lodge, and they have been the owners and the tenants of it ever since. Now, if we walk down the 300 block of Wilcox Street and look catty corner from the B&B Cafe, we'll see the Castle Cafe, built of rhyolite. It was built in 1901. Now, it was a very popular place on weekends. In the early parts of the 20th century, people from all over the county would come to the Castle Cafe for dances, and these dances were held on the 2nd floor of the building. They often had to hire extra policemen to take care of the crowds at the Castle Cafe. Another interesting note on the cafe was that in the basement, for about 5 years in the late 1930s, they had boxing matches. Okay, let's walk down west on 4th Street to Jerry Street and make a right, and at the end of that block is another home made of rhyolite. Today it houses the Chamber of Commerce, more popularly known as Victoria's House for Victoria Christensen, a very active person in the community, active in civic affairs and such. Her parents bought the house in the 1890s, and after they had passed away, she became owner of the house. In 1910, Victoria married Milton Honold, and she was pregnant with their first child when he was killed in a hunting accident. She remained in the house. A couple of years later, she married Thorwald Christensen. They had 2 additional children and lived on in Victoria's house until Victoria passed away about 1946. It's interesting to note that Victoria is buried in Cedar Hill Cemetery, lying between her 2 husbands. And that brings us to the last rhyolite structure here in Castle Rock that we're going to talk about, although it was the first one built. We're at 420 Albert Street, and that is the home of the Castle Rock History Museum. It was originally built in 1875 to serve as the depot on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. By the mid-1960s, the railroad no longer had use for the depot, and they wanted to get rid of it. They were fortunate enough to find a buyer, and they were happy to sell it for the meager sum of $25. Now, of course, the buyer had to move it. That was the big expense. But thank God that they did, because we now have it here at 420 Albert Street, and it serves as our museum. Now, as Angie showed you at the beginning of this video, we have many wonderful artifacts here at the museum, and I hope you'll stop by sometime to learn more about the museum and also about the rhyolite buildings that we've been discussing.